Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name's John Salambini, and I'll be moderating today's session, Modernizing Utility Project Forecasting. If you could just stay on mute, we're going to be answering some questions in a Q&A later on in the session. So if you have any questions that you would like to ask, please input them into the chat. And we look forward to a really good, productive session. This is meant to be educational and to try and get as much feedback from the industry as we can. So looking forward to that. So in terms of why we're here, I want to introduce Garrett Lyons, who leads our software strategy and go-to-market initiatives and business development, and Christine Rowley, who's our principal consultant. Both individuals, both Garrett and Christine, have been in the industry over 20 years. So we have very good, deep experience within the utility market. And Christine has worked for Excel Energy. So there's a direct correlation to what we're presenting here and what we're going to demonstrate. So with that, let me turn it over to Garrett, and we'll get started. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for jumping on a Thursday morning. Today, we're going to go through, as John mentioned, the concept of modernizing utility project forecasting. And we're going to cover that topic in a variety of ways, but generally follow this outline. We're going to talk a little bit about industry goals and objectives, go through what we've found and kind of defined as the 5 essentials to modernizing forecasting and achieving reliable forecasts. We'll talk a little bit about what we've seen in the industry for, I guess, the better part of 20 years through utilities forecasting practices and how that's actually working. We'll go into our solution that was purposely built actually for utility forecasting called CURA Forecasting, and give a bit of an overview. And then Christine will be joining me to go through a demonstration of the product. And then we're going to try to allow some time at the end for questions. As John mentioned, if you guys have questions as we go, feel free to enter them into the chat, and we'll get moving. So probably everybody in this call has a relatively good knowledge of the utility industry. Pretty much any utility, public, investor-owned, have very, very similar goals overall. At a high level, customers, employees talk about affordability, reliability, sustainability, and then from like a stakeholder or shareholder perspective, talking about financial stewardship and controlling costs, including O&M costs overall on an annual basis. Now, what you guys may not be aware is that 60 to 80% of that annual capital, those annual capital investments are linked to projects. And this reliable project forecasting is really critical to achieving the key outcomes. And while there are a lot of benefits associated with improving overall from a forecasting perspective, at a high level, most utilities have similar objectives. And when it comes to forecasting, usually first and foremost, they're trying to hit an annual budget target. In the process of going through the monthly forecasting process, they're trying to improve the way they manage cash from an organization perspective. They want to be able to not only hit a target spend, but also meet in-service goals for assets over the course of an annual or a fiscal year, and obviously do things in such a way to support the rate case process as well. So when you think about forecasting, and when you think about just managing projects and the project lifecycle in general, we've been implementing solutions in the capital project management area for about 20 years. And when we started working with utilities back in, I guess, about 2006, what we began to notice is that project forecasting was always a challenge. And when we kind of dug into over time what the challenges were, we observed that about 80% of the challenges that utilities have when it comes to project forecasting are related to the same core issues. And so we kind of coined the term modernizing utility project forecasting. But what it essentially means is making a decision from an organizational perspective to actually focus on addressing what we've determined are really the five essential elements to achieving reliable project forecasts and predictable project outcomes. And those elements, while there are other things that people may want in terms of business function, from an organizational perspective, we feel like standardization, centralization, automation, the ability to define metrics and manage to metrics, and auditability are really the keys to achieving reliable forecasts. So as we dig into those a little bit, because this is really has nothing to do with software, it's really more of a practice guideline. And when we kind of go into it, we'll kind of define some of these because it'll be important in the context of the rest of the presentation. When we talk about standardization as a key, you know, in terms of the forecasting process, and while I think some of these items utilities do a decent job of, but you've got to be able to establish and communicate a consistent process. You've got to define a methodology as well as a mechanism that you're going to use for forecasting. And last but definitely not least, to achieve consistent forecasting across the organization, you have to have standard coding structures, calculations. People need to be looking at the data and analyzing the data the same way. Now, if you're fortunate enough to get through standardization, the next core component is centralization. And this should seem pretty obvious for people, but now that you have a standard process, you obviously want to centralize the data. So you need a centralized location where you're in some way, shape, or form getting project information. You'd ideally like to have a centralized platform or solution or set of tools that people are using on a regular basis for forecasting. And you'd like to get, because most people are getting this stuff through spreadsheets now, incorporate third-party forecasts. I mean, if you're a utility, you're leveraging a lot of EPCs, contractors for work, and all those individuals are submitting you forecasts on a monthly basis. So being able to incorporate those into a centralized location is a key aspect of achieving reliable forecasts. If you've done standardization and centralization, the next key component is automation. So for those that have been around, you probably heard the phrase like, from a project controls perspective, asking the question, your project controls people, are they data entry specialists or are they data analysts? Well, if you're going through centralization and doing it all manual, by default, they're probably data entry specialists. So the concept of automation is taking the process of centralization and actually creating integrations, interfaces to automatically consolidate that data. We want to also apply rule-based calculations to ensure like appropriate logics being utilized for not only obviously direct costs, but indirect costs. And we want an ability to actually automate forecasting functions. So if basic business functions, redistributing forecasts, entering forecast information, as much as we can do to automate that process is definitely key. If you don't have performance metrics, you have no way to tell how you're doing on your project. So while obviously we started this presentation with kind of four basic key drivers, but having a solution that gives you an ability to establish performance metrics, manage to those performance metrics, including things like variance thresholds, variance explanations, etc. And then giving you an ability to track against those is really key to actually determine the overall health of all your projects and ultimately be able to predict how these projects are going to perform to achieve your annual budget target. And last but definitely not least, auditability. So if you are fortunate enough to have all the other four, I mean, auditability is really key because as you're going through the forecasting process, you need to, one, have a set of user controls to be able to track what people are doing from a forecasting perspective. You obviously want to have a repository that provides like point in time information for project forecasts, as well as historical information for forecasts. And you want an ability to actually trace forecast decisions with comments and other items or key decisions on your forecasting process so that ultimately you can prove and support all the decisions you're making over the course of these projects. So with those 5 things said, we're going to talk a little bit about how this is being done today. So at a high level, some people on the call have probably seen a similar slide. For most utilities, or for that matter, just about any organization, they want to do 2 things. They want to upfront from a planning perspective, they want to do the right projects, and then ultimately from an execution perspective, they want to do the projects right. Well, in the course of those 2 items, where typically you've got portfolio management versus project management and controls, project forecasting is actually critical to both sides. And it is not only critical to managing your ability to hit targets for the end of a fiscal year, but oftentimes you're actually forecasting multi-year projects, and the next year of that project actually is being considered for the planning for the following year. So it actually spans both areas. Now, from a utility perspective, so while utilities have done a lot of things to centralize information over the last 20 years, most people have deployed an ERP system. They're at the time, maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, the process really for forecasting looked very similar to this. So usually it was riddled with a variety of spreadsheets. Typically, it started with a standard one, usually with project controls or project management. That spreadsheet was then supplemented with spreadsheets from contractors. It was then forwarded on to spreadsheets and combined by program managers, and eventually getting up to stakeholders, and ultimately process being fairly manual. Now, if we take a look 20 years later, let's take a look at what utilities are doing today. And if this graphic looks eerily similar, sadly, over 20 years, most utilities are doing the same thing. That while they've deployed project management systems and various control systems, financial systems, the actual forecasting process for most organizations is still spreadsheet driven. So the upside of having an industry use spreadsheets for about 20 years is that you actually have metrics associated with it. So as you can see, I mean, currently about 70% of all organizations have spreadsheets involved in their forecasting process. When it comes to actually extracting data and centralizing it, most organizations are extracting data, oftentimes manually, from between 7 and 12 different systems. Still, in this day and age, 60 to 75% of the overall process is manual. And if you're a project controls analyst, particularly, and even some project managers, depending on the responsibility, you're spending on average about 120 hours a month just reconciling forecast data. So the evidence is really overwhelming, but yet many utilities have not really modified their process over time. And what does that yield? Well, unfortunately for many utilities, it yields a pile of spreadsheets. And spreadsheets, just in and of themselves, inherently actually fail to meet any of the 5 essentials we just went through. And in addition to that, it's typically results for most organizations in things like information silos, a lot of manual process, so a lot of data integrity issues. And then, from an overall organization perspective, reduced productivity and operational efficiency, typically poor cash management, and last but not least, and maybe the most important, is lack of stakeholder or shareholder confidence. So in response to this challenge over about the last 20 years, we took all the information that we had related to utility forecast use cases and actually decided that we would actually build and develop a commercially available product that was specifically designed to address these forecasting challenges. So I guess it was about 8 years ago, we endeavored to develop CURA Forecasting. And what CURA Forecasting is it's a purpose-built software. It was built around significant utility use cases and gives people an ability to standardize, automate ultimately the monthly and annual forecasting process. The system itself is really built around those five essentials we just talked about. So it gives organizations an ability to standardize on their process, centralize all of that data, includes the ability to automate the collection of data from one or more source systems for the forecasting process. You have the ability to not only define, but track all of your performance metrics within the solution. And from the time you log in to the time you log off, everything is auditable. It's all stored in one single database, and you have the ability to go back and do historical analysis as well. And the system itself, of course, in this day and age, is available in the cloud for scalability and availability purposes, and just to kind of minimize the costs associated with any kind of custom tools or hosting a solution on site. So as we get into CURA, and before I turn it over to Christine from a demonstration perspective, I want to give you an overview of kind of what we're going to go through. So within CURA, we've expanded it significantly over time. But what you're going to see is a solution that by design is kind of oriented much like an Excel spreadsheet. So when we looked at adoption issues for utilities with other software solutions over 20 years, and we basically recognized the fact that most people are still using spreadsheets, we wanted to create a system that was commercially available, centralized database, but ultimately had this similar look and feel. So when Christine goes through the demonstration, we'll talk about how CURA gives you the ability to centralize all your forecast data in a single platform. We're going to go through standardization and some of the standardization capabilities, including the ability to define AFUDC, kayak, GNA in the system as well. The system, of course, is supported by dashboards, graphs, performance metrics that not only project controls people, project controls managers, and for that matter, executives can actually look at to track the performance across one or more projects. Significant, we knew we were competing with Excel spreadsheets in many ways, and so we wanted to make the system very flexible. We felt like we needed to create an interface that would give people an ability to look at data in a variety of different ways that align to their preferences and the forecasting process. And Christine will go through some of that. I mentioned usability at the beginning, but again, spreadsheet look and feel to facilitate user adoption across an organization. And while obviously it's not a spreadsheet, we did try to incorporate some of the basic capabilities that people are used to using in spreadsheets to ease the transition to a more centralized system. It does facilitate collaboration with external project team members. So when Christine goes through the demo, when we wanted to solve the forecasting problem, we actually wanted to address the problem beyond just the internal project teams and give contractors, EPCs, an ability to submit forecasts across projects and their contracts directly in the system. And so Christine will talk a little bit about that capability. Variance, extremely important. The ability to define variance thresholds across projects and support the ability, if you exceed that threshold, to actually provide a variance explanation directly in the system. And I mentioned at the beginning, auditing is a very core component to having a reliable forecasting solution, and the system does contain auditing in every aspect. So you guys will always know what forecast changes are made, who made those changes over the life of a project. It is available in the cloud. We currently, and we also, CURA Forecasting does have an embedded integration layer called CURA Exchange that comes with the solution that gives us an ability to actually connect to a variety of source systems to actually extract data and pull it into CURA Forecasting for forecasting purposes. And as some people on the call may be aware, we also are an local partner, and we actually built CURA Forecasting to integrate with Primavera Unifier as well. We have some history and experience with Unifier, and also aware that when it comes to utilities, Oracle and Primavera definitely own a large share of the utility market. So when we built the solution, we also wanted to enable integration with that as well. So with that being said, I wanted to get through that and turn it over to Christine, who will be actually walking through a live demonstration today. And I want to remind people that if you do have any questions as we go through the demonstration, feel free to put them up in the chat and we'll try to address them as they come in. If we don't address them as they come in, we'll definitely address them at the end. So, Christine, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Garrett. I'm just going to switch to my screen here and hoping you guys are seeing a screen that was similar to what Garrett was showing there. So all that I've done at this point is logged into CURA. And as Garrett mentioned, CURA Forecasting is for cost control analysts, project managers, program managers, and executives. Everybody's going to look at the information from a different perspective. And where I'm at right now is my work in my home. And it gives us quick visibility to my projects and my programs. And as we can see right here, I've got 4 programs that are assigned to me and I've got 5 projects. Now, the real world is you might have 1 or 2 if you're working on a really, really big project, but that list could span 20, 30. I think we had one person at one of our utilities that was managing 50 on a given month. I don't know how they could keep track of everything, but they were much smaller projects and they had to go in and manage all of these different projects. So the other thing that it does is it gives me quick access to many different dashboards that are all configurable. So as I go through this, I can quickly see on any particular program that I have, what are my most resilient KPIs? What are the top KPIs that I need to look at on a month-to-month basis? I've got 9 of them here in my demo environment. These are all configurable. There are up to, or there's well over 40 or 50 different, I'll call them KPIs or widgets that are available. And really it's up to the organization to pick the ones that are most resilient and are the key ones for your organization. Same thing is applied at a project level. I have these key aspects that are here. But maybe it's these might be my top 9, but there's a lot more that I really want to do. And there's more that I'm being asked about on any given day, or somebody else may log in. So I can start to create different dashboards that are going to show me different types of information. And so these are all defined. I can do a bunch of different things in here. We've got some things where it talks about the health and I'll show different graphs. So I can see and configure it exactly how I need to use it. So as an executive coming in, great, this is programs and projects. What do I want to see? I want to see how my organization is doing overall. So one of the things, or maybe I'm being asked by the executive as well, is, what is this for all the projects or my slice of projects? So in other words, this might not be my organization, but maybe I'm only in charge of transmission and I want this view to be transmission only. So permissions and all those other things come into play, but now I can see what's the culmination of everything put together. What was last year looking like? What's my current year? What's my future year? And again, with the different widgets up at the top, showing me the key KPIs that I want to have in this view. Again, things that can be configured, we can add to it. You can have more than what's here. But from here, I can start to drill into what are my programs, what are my projects, and look at a specific one to get that filter and start to see everything that goes along with my particular program or project. So once I get that view, I'm sorry, Garrett, were you going to jump in there? All right. So as I go back to my work, and I'm going to put on my program manager's hat, just like we showed, as a program manager, I can see my key KPIs. I can also go in, and I'll show this in a different area, where I can start to see things from a program perspective of what are all the different projects that make up this particular program, and what is their total costs. And by the way, all these codes, which we'll get into in a minute here, are all defined, but I can see all my different projects and what are the key aspects going across from a program perspective. If I come back here, I can now start to look at it from a project perspective. So from a project perspective, I can see all of these KPIs. So great, I've got a lot of information right at my fingertips. I can hopefully answer these questions right away as people ask me things. This is real time. I have access to everything that I see here. But a lot of what all my forecasting is all about and what it revolves around is month end. So there's an email when I was back doing this as my regular job that would come around every month and it would say, hey, for this month, day one, because I have a month end cycle, finance and accounting would send it out. Day one, we're going to do labor loadings, and then day two is overheads, and day three, I might have accruals due. And it sounds like it's a very set structure, which it was. It was day one, two, three, four, whatever was all defined. But sometimes they change the dates. Sometimes they would actually put Saturday into play. Sometimes they would merge days 2 and 3. And so there was, like I said, there was always an email that went around. I now have the ability to share a calendar of events with my team of what's coming up. So, and as you can see, I can actually add holidays in here. So I've got Thanksgiving, but I can see when each of these activities are planned to be performed. So as somebody that's interacting with this, it's key to know, and you know, what days are all of my things due? And then where am I at with doing everything? So labor loadings, that means just more of my actuals are being loaded. My overheads are loaded. Oh, wait, my accruals are due. What do I have to do for my accruals? And how do I know what is going to be done? So as I go through this, and actually I'm going to come back to that in a minute, I can start to see what was all being done at month end. One of the key things here and what this my home screen is all about in my work is I can easily jump to the things that I need to do. So one of the first things I need to do with a project is build a forecast. So here I'm going to jump into a forecast screen. And actually from here, I've got different things, as Garrett pointed out, and I'm going to use a different view here. And as part of that, and when I look at my forecast screen, there's things that are balanced out here. First, I have rows that is determining how my breakdown is being done, and I've got columns across the top. My rows, as Garrett said, was the cost code structure. And what you see here is a very common structure that's used. It can be changed, it's configured per customer, it's all different things, but most people want to see things like, I want to see my labor, I want to see my contracts, I want to see materials, and oh yeah, I've got these other things that come into play that are calculated lines. So as I look at these and I can break them out, I can do different things with all of this information. And I can start to create different views, which if I go back to my default view here, I can start to drag and drop different things so I can group and sort and see summary totals. Oops, that one now became my default view. There we go. Oops. My forecast summary, I can now see them grouped and sorted. So what I've done is said, okay, I want to group them by these different things so that as I drill into them, for example, labor here, I can start to drill down to the different levels. That's a lot of grouping and filtering, and I get summaries by all of them. So I don't like it that much. So I start to take some of these things off. And really what I want to see is just at the high level. So I go to labor and boom, I can see everything associated with it. So this is giving me my structure. As I look at it, I've got labor, then I've got my departments, and I can go from there. And I've got my contracts, which I've got contracts, what type of contract, and I'm going as far as adding a vendor into some of these things as well. So as I've got my structure built here, and I look at it, and these typically equate to all the lines that I have and all the rows that I have on my spreadsheets. I have other things that inform my forecast. And that's where we've got our columns going across the top. I've got my project, which I want to see, hey, what's my overall project budget? Somewhere along the line, I've created a forecast. I've taken a snapshot and I've submitted that. And that's become my overall project budget. With any project, there are revisions. So we have a revised budget. Then we start to capture actuals. And by the way, all of these things are being fed in, like Garrett said, from our CURA exchange system. And for some reason, my mouse doesn't want to toggle over. But I start to come with things for estimate to complete, both by hours and by dollars, and what's my estimate at completion. The other columns that start to heavily influence this, I'm going to go to, sorry guys, hold on a second. It doesn't want to grab, my mouse does not want to grab. There we go. So the other things that influence my forecasting are my contracts. As contracts are let out, they automatically get loaded into the system and assigned to the lines, and I can see the total contract value. One of the most important things, especially for utilities, is not just my overall budget, but what's my current year budget. Every year I'm forced to adhere to a budget that I established last year, and I need to report and monitor how am I doing to my budget. And again, they'll always have revisions. And then knowing what my actuals to date are, my estimate to complete, estimate at completion, all the standard things that go with that. As I start to move along the spectrum here further, and I think it's because I made this just, so as I go, I'm just going to toggle over here. I can start to see variances and that type of things. So as I move across, my actuals start to load in month over month. I can see what's happening, and then I get to forecasting. So as I start to forecast, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller again. I can see, as I said, I had my rows here, and I've got my columns, and then I've got my calculated lines that are automatically functioning for my indirects, my kayak, and oh yeah, by the way, down here at the bottom, I've got totals, of which I can configure what I want my totals to be. Obviously everybody wants a full total, but do I want to see just my labor broken out at the bottom here? Do I want to see a direct? Do I want to see indirects? Do I want to include kayak or reimbursables? Those types of things. So as I start to look at this and I'm ready to do my forecasting, and I go into an unlock mode, which is telling me I've got the control of this forecast, and I go to my labor, I am now starting to see, oops, take all these off. I am going to see what my forecast has been. I can enter a forecast for what I've got here, as well as enter in other things into the project. So as we'll see here in forecast for the month of January for project controls, I've got a number and I've got dollars. What's this number all about? A lot of people, and what I think about when I'm planning for my project controls people, I have one or I have four, but I really don't know what they're going to make, but I can look at my actuals and figure it out and trend it. But I also can just say, hey, they're going to be full-time this month. So I'm putting in 160 hours. With that 160 hours, it's automatically going to calculate the cost. If I don't want to do that and I just want to put in a cost, I can put in 10,000 and it'll automatically calculate my hours for me. With that, if I'm sitting down and walking through this with my project manager, I'm the project manager working with cost controls, or I'm working with maybe my construction manager, and I'm going to make a note on something. Why did I only plan 40 hours, or why did I even plan 40 hours for legal? If you'll note, there's a little red triangle here, and I have the ability to add comments. So as you can see, I've added a comment that says, I put legal in here to review the T's and C's for new material contract. Oh, that's right. I've got that coming up in January. I'm going to go ahead and have them do that. The other thing I can do is that maybe it's not on a particular line, but I want to make a comment on this project or remember something that I have to do in one of my meetings. I can make comments that says 2 new contracts going out for bid in November. Make sure you put in the new award date. Maybe it's shifted. Maybe it's planned for my other forecast. And I made this quick note because I didn't have time to come in and do it. But I made the quick note to remind myself that that needs to be done. Start to look at materials. With materials, again, I can enter into my information. Like Garrett said, this is much like Excel. Or just like Excel, I can use a calculator. And with a calculator, I can do, add, subtract, multiply, divide, or I can add in my own formulas. Maybe I want a unit price, maybe I want a crew size, or maybe I want different types of things to put in here. I can add all of these different types of calculations. as well as, like I said, copy paste. I can add cost codes, but distribution is everybody's favorite. From distribution, I can add 2 months. Across the board, I just want to add $5,000 for 4 months. I could choose that. I'm going to skip curves right now. I want to move it by months. I want to shift this line or this group of lines because I can highlight more than one. I want to shift the whole thing 3 months because we're going to delay it. Or I just want a prior month distribution, which says whatever I was over or under by last month, because it's just noise in these particular lines, just automatically reduce or add to the coming month. But the most common ones is curves. I can select a dollar amount. I can select when I want to start it, when I want to add it, how, when is it going to, how many months, and what type of profile do I have here. Once I choose that, I choose distribute, and it'll automatically distribute my curves along. So as I start to come in here, I start to do this. As I hit recalculate, things will change, as in kayak. I have a reimbursable contract. In this particular one, I've set it up and said, yes, it's reimbursable. Others may not. In this case, I took my reimbursable as, I think I have it set at 90%, just looking at my remainder listing here. So I said it's 90% reimbursable. I'm sharing it in some aspect, or I'm taking on 10% of the burden. So it's automatically calculating when that would be. I have different types of kayaks. Maybe I want to do it a month in arrears. Maybe I want to do my entire reimbursement is at in service date. And oh, if you notice the month of February here, it's yellow. That's telling me that for this project, if I go up here, that my in-service date is set right now to February 2026. So again, giving me that flag that, hey, I've got something, it's going in service in February. And if that's changing, I need to go change it in the external system because it's feeding here. Or if it's not being stored in the external system, in most cases they are, I need to go in and change it in the system here. Once I get to contracts, I can do much of the same things that I did with my materials. But one thing about contracts is that, oh, well, maybe my contractors are ones that are better suited to give me what they plan to spend the next month. If you're like me, you send out the emails, or the project manager or the project controls person, whoever it is, or maybe it's both. Maybe it's the construction manager, maybe it's the engineer in charge of that contract that has to do it. But they're sending out emails to their contractors and say, hey, what do you plan on getting done next month? What'd you get done this month? What's the rest of the contract looking like, etc. And they're getting feedback, and then they're all trying to give it back to the person that's in charge of entering it in here. And it just becomes a rat race of all those different connectors. Well, I could choose, and what CURA has is maybe I want to invite my vendors into CURA. And we've created what we call a vendor portal. So in this case, I've logged in as a vendor, and I can see the different contracts that I have, and they're all of the same value. And I can see what I've done. I can add comments. I can add different things to each particular contract. And I can choose to break it down, or I can choose to forecast it as it is over the total. So as I go through here, I can update my forecast, and as a vendor, here we go, I can do this better now. I can see my actuals coming in, as well as over on the right here, what my forecast is going to be, and I can choose apply or submit. And I've got monthly worksheets. This one's for November 2025. And as I come back now to my contract here, I can see it from this screen. But what I like to do is I like to go back to my home screen. Now, if I go back down to my project, and we started talking about month end through all of this, I've done my forecast, or I've set up my forecast. I've got to do an accrual. I could have entered it in there, but I can see this little bell here with a 1 by it. That tells me I have one vendor worksheet, and I can launch it in that one of my vendors has submitted. And it's telling me they submitted on 3 different contracts here. I can click on the icon itself and see what they've submitted. So down here, I can see that they've broken this down. submitted it, when are they planning to do it. I can choose to consume this worksheet by clicking this button, which just overwrites it into my contract. And up here, it's showing me the forecast for this project. Or I can just go right up to the line in the contract in my forecast and update my forecast as we go through here. So once I've done that, I've now go back down to my schedule and says, okay, done it. I've looked at my accruals. I've done my actuals. Oh, my variance. How am I performing to last month? So when I go to how am I performing to last month, I am going to go to this screen right here. I click on my variance and I can automatically see based on the thresholds that we set up. I've got $100,000. It must be over $100,000 and 10% in this case. And in that case, when it's over that threshold, it's telling me that it is this red square indicator, this particular measure is out of compliance. This one that's the green, it says it is in compliance, but here's my variance amount. And oh, by the way, I've started to explain some things down here by putting in a variance driver and doing different things along those lines to what my variance is. And I can see that I've explained it. And if you notice, this button now is yellow. It's saying, okay, that might have been out of compliance. It was red to begin with, but now that I've explained it, I'm going to indicate it as yellow. And how do I understand and how do I know what's variant? Over here, I can see what are my variance amounts. I can click on it and see what are my most resilient variance or highest number of by cost code line, what's contributing to my variance. And I can see construction services is $3 million over. I can start to sit and explain it and I can get on to the different things here. And again, I get a visual representation of where am I sitting, what's it looking like, all of those different things there. So again, then I come to my variance explanations and oh, now I have forecast due again. So I set up my forecast. I come back to here. I've implemented my variance, but now I've got a different view that I call just forecast, where I've pulled these different things up. But over on the right here, I've snapped two columns. I want to see a budget variance and an undistributed commitment because that's telling me where am I off and where might I need to pay attention in my forecast that we were just looking at. Oops, I went too far. As I'm looking at, as I go through here and look at it from that standpoint. One of the other views that is always very helpful is, maybe I just want to see this by year. I wanted to answer quick questions. I can go into this one and now my totals are just showing up per year. Now that I've gone through my month-end cycle, all this information is automatically feeding. I've looked at my different views. Now I really want to look at what's my performance? How am I performing? And as you see, I've got a dashboard here that's about my forecast health. We looked at that one a little bit, where it was in or out. What am I doing over time with my EAC? But one of the other things that a lot of people like to look at when we're looking at forecasts is we start to get into performance management. Oops, that one's the vendor worksheet. There we go. We get into performance management. So CURA also will do, because I've got all the cost information. The only thing that I'm missing to do, quote unquote, earned value is what is my percent complete? And there's a lot of factors, and I can set up and do new analysis views and that type of thing. But I can automatically key in, and this one I set up at the project level. I could do this at the cost code level. I could bring this information automatically in from P6 if I wanted to, but it's going to calculate my CPI and SPI. But everybody likes it when we want to go distribute it. And this is the first month, so I don't have a history here. But I've got what is it over time? What's my current? And this, if I had some more information in here over months, would tell me how am I performing over time. So with that, I've looked at what's my performance, how am I doing to my overall health. I can continue to monitor my performance. I continue to look at these things as I'm going through the month, but I've taken what I've done as a forecast and enveloped all the other activities around those. So Garrett, I don't know if we have any questions or if you want to take it from there. Did I lose you, Garrett? I think you might still be on
I
mute.
think I was just going to say, Christine, I think it's an interesting concept where, from a utility perspective, the annual budget target typically is set with total project cost, right? Directs and indirects. But it is incredibly rare, if ever, that I actually see any utility have visibility from a project perspective into total project costs, directs and indirects before they actually submit their forecast. And so I think you touched on that a little bit, just going through some of the automated calculation of loadings, et cetera. But based on our current clients, that's a fairly significant difference between what they're used to, and gives them a lot more visibility and capability to hit accurate numbers on a monthly basis. Um, and I think the
So
only
there's a
other
question in
oh, go
there,
ahead.
Garrett. It says when building a forecast for a project, is there an ability to do scenario modeling and what if analysis? And there absolutely is.
Yes.
When I went back into the forecast here, I can look at different scenarios. I can assign scenarios. I can create scenarios. I'm on a lock state right now, so I can't add another scenario, and then I can view the different scenarios here. And when I'm in a scenario, I can assign it as the forecast. Let's say I do 10 different scenarios, roll them up to a program or a different type of scenario. And I can say, oh, but I like this one. So if this one's going to become my new one, I can go ahead and assign it, which I've already done, which is why it's grayed out. But I could have already assigned this and apply that forecast. And one of the things I didn't touch on, that is really key and fundamental to everything that we're doing in CURA, is something called snapshots. So at the end of the month, when I finish my forecast, globally, we'll do a monthly forecast. But as I go through the process of a project, the life cycle, I might be going through gate one, gate two, gate three, and people call it all different things. But I want to keep a snapshot of a project. And oh, by the way, when I do those snapshots for gate one, two, and three, inevitably somebody's going to come along and say, what's changed between gates one and two? And then I didn't really hit on this, but there's all this reporting. And included in this reporting, one of the things that I can report on is snapshot comparisons. I can do it by programs and projects or by cost codes. And I can now see from one to the next, what are all the differences? Okay, so a lot bigger answer than you guys wanted, but I thought I'd hit on that.
All right. I don't see any other questions, Christine. I appreciate you kind of walking through. I know that was kind of a whirlwind for this, but I would say, if anybody on the call, either yourself or somebody at your organization has any questions about it or would like to get into more of the details around Cura, just reach out and contact us. We'd be happy to do that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, Christine. And we've got a few minutes before the hour here, and I want to just kind of go through, typically what we've seen from a benefits perspective. So, as you guys probably are aware, particularly if you're involved in project controls, some of our existing clients, well, I threw up some numbers at the beginning of this session. Uh, some of our clients were reporting, spending upward to 40 to 60 hours per person just getting data prepared to actually forecast on a monthly basis. And so, as you can see from Cura, automating that process is a pretty significant difference. What our current clients have been able to do is really standardize on process. They've been able to achieve centralization. So they've got a system of record for project forecast data. Leverage the automation that Christine talked about with Cura Exchange in terms of getting information into the system. From an efficiency perspective, project controls people are now given an opportunity to do their job. They're not stuck in a process and a methodology that pretty much requires that they are just entering data on a monthly basis. And now they have the luxury of actually looking at the data and providing value from an organizational perspective. We've been able to reduce some infrastructure costs based on cloud, and also increase overall performance, reliability, and predictable outcomes for projects. And, for many utilities, hitting an annual target, making sure projects are in service, is critical from a stakeholder and shareholder perspective. And as you kind of saw with CURA, not only do individuals have real-time visibility into the forecast on a monthly basis, how that forecast or forecasts across projects are impacting that overall annual target, but also the ability to actually track projects by in-service date as well. So you're bringing in all those things together in one system. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to John here to kind of wrap things up for today. And I'll just say, prior to turning it over, I really appreciate everybody taking the time to attend.
Thanks, Garrett. So we appreciate everybody's time today, and I know there was a lot to cover. We're looking forward to potentially following up and understanding a lot more about, since we were talking at you, understanding a lot more about what your environment is, and basically having a discussion about what you see in the industry and how we can be part of improving it. So with that, I just want to thank everybody, and thank you, Gary, Christine, and all the attendees, and hope to discuss some things in the future. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Appreciate the time today. Have a good rest of the day.